The Radioman who found the backdoor. He didn't look like a mastermind, John A. Walker Jr., or the quiet authority of a Navy communicator, efficient when it mattered, invisible when it helped. As a radioman who rose to chief warrant officer, he lived at the junction of the Navy's nervous system. Messages flowed past his hands the way current slips along a hull, relentless, routine, full of meaning if you knew what not to ignore. He did. That was the tragedy. To understand his leverage, remember what a communications specialist touches. Crypto key lists, call signs, routing indicators, frequency plans, daily changeovers, the bland cover sheets that tell you when a net wakes up and when it shuts down, the manuals everyone treats like furniture because the room would collapse without them. He learned the language behind the language, not what a message said, but how and when it chose to speak. In 1967, with debts piling and ego whispering, he walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C., with samples and a pitch. No recruitment dance, just an offer. Here are the keys to a kingdom you can't see. KGB tested the goods and saw the value. What arrived first wasn't the crown jewels of weapon design. It was the index to our language, keying material and procedures that unlocked yesterday, today, and if you were patient, tomorrow. With keys and schedules, Soviet analysts didn't need every plaintext to learn patterns. They built a heartbeat map. Who talks to whom when nets spike, when submarines roll from routine to readiness, and when silence means full alert rather than calm. Walker understood that metadata is oxygen. He also understood how crypto discipline erodes under repetition. A daily change becomes a ritual. Rituals become predictable. Predictability becomes a profile. He skimmed what an operator barely glances at: the timing of broadcasts, the cadence of corrections, the recurring routing strings before a major exercise. Then he fed that rhythm to Moscow. Between 1967 and 1985, he turned routine access into a subscription service. The early Soviet payoff was speed and confidence. Their decrypt units, guided by keys and context, stopped tripping over guesswork. More importantly, naval staffs began predicting when U.S. submarines would enter certain states of operations. Not longitude-latitude precise, but precise enough to shape where to point sensors, when to surge an ASW patrol, and when to listen harder at choke points because the message cadence said, now. Former Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger would later conclude the Soviets made significant gains in naval warfare attributable to Walker's espionage. Inside the Pentagon, others called the damage serious, not disastrous. The fleet didn't wait for consensus. It acted like prey that knew a hunter had its rhythm. Meanwhile, Walker played the patient clerk. He didn't haul safes. He harvested procedures. He copied key lists, photographed comms instructions, and memorized small friction sailors complained about, because friction reveals workarounds, and workarounds reveal seams. He noticed which circuits stayed up after drills, which fallback nets only woke for real problems, which call signs followed particular platforms. One man building a cross-reference the adversary could exploit. His motive mutated. The first drops were about cash, thousands at a time, then more, and the control it bought. Later, it was about being indispensable to the other side and untouchable at home. He bragged in private that his material made him a hero in Moscow. Closer to the truth, he made US patrols statistically more predictable. That's deadlier than anyone's secret. Then came scale. Value multiplies with access, so he replicated himself. He nudged a friend, communications expert Jerry Whitworth, who sat near the crown jewels, operational crypto and submarine comms methods. He primed his own son, Michael, to treat document handling like heritage. He drew in his brother Arthur for industrial crumbs that completed pictures. Over the years, the KGB paid Walker more than $1 million, cash that bought comfort and control and kept the pipeline alive. Compartmentation kept each man clean in his mind. Nobody saw the full map but him. That's how he sold it to them. That's how he sold it to himself. Inside Soviet workflows, the material wasn't shelved. It was weaponized into timing. Analysts married keys and schedules to real ocean behavior, correlating spikes with US exercises, then building predictive rules. If net X changed at hour Y, boats on Patrol Z were likely in State Alpha. If routing string Q appeared twice in a window, a certain platform class was shifting posture. This wasn't magic. It was statistics with blood pressure. Years later, KGB defector Vitaly Yushchenko would call Walker the best source for classified information that they ever had. A blunt confirmation of how deeply this pipeline shaped Soviet naval confidence. Stakes climbed quietly on our side. Crews at sea noticed Soviet presence in places that felt like good guesses too often. A trailing contact that shadowed a course change longer than chance. A patrol aircraft orbit appearing exactly when a narrowband test began. Nobody wrote, "Walker did this," on a wardroom whiteboard. But the rituals of unpredictability, randomizing message times, breaking favorite habits, drilling micro-power changes, began to harden. Sailors learned to beat their own rhythm because someone else was counting. Tradecraft hid in suburbia. Walker standardized dead drops, plastic-wrapped bundles sealed against rain, tucked under culverts or behind guardrails, and signal sites so ordinary you'd never notice unless you were looking. A folded sunshade meant go, a strip of tape meant abort. Cash drifted into a lifestyle supervisors should have questioned. Better meals, sudden trips, gifts without receipts. He hid behind competence. Chiefs don't audit a warrant officer's wallet. Years later, after the arrests in 1985, the damage assessment split the room. Devastating, serious but not disastrous. What's clear is how the fleet behaved. Assume at-sea comms were profiled. The fix wasn't a gadget, it was culture, shorter key lifetimes, redesigned distribution, two-person integrity that mattered, minimized traffic, randomized cadence, compartmentation by actual need. Uncertainty stopped being a byproduct and became policy. The origin point sits in a simple, brutal decision in 1967. A radio man walked into an embassy with the Navy's nervous system in his briefcase. From there, routine turned into leverage, leverage turned into a family enterprise, and a family enterprise taught an adversary to read silence like a map, turning espionage into a family enterprise. Scaling didn't start in a back alley. It started at a kitchen table. John Walker looked around at the people he could control and saw throughput, access without paperwork, loyalty disguised as love, risk he could manage because he'd taught them the rules. Family was frictionless logistics. Arthur came first. The older brother had left the Navy but worked around defense contracts, manufacturing specs, logistics notes, training syllabi. Nothing labeled top secret, everything that completed a picture. John pitched it like harmless help. Don't touch crown jewels, he said. Lift what nobody guards. Component lists, process charts, spares schedules that telegraphed when a shipyard would finish, when a system would phase in, when a boat might sail. Arthur rationalized it as low heat. He was wrong. Dull fragments tell loud stories when analysts overlay them on keys and comms. Meanwhile, Jerry Whitworth, Radioman's Radioman, sat close to operational crypto and submarine circuits. John groomed the grievance and the pride. You're underpaid, he said. You're indispensable. The system owes you. Whitworth hesitated, then crossed. What he moved wasn't rumor. It was live arteries. Key lists, change schedules, net procedures, margins filled with the nuance only a meticulous tech notices. In Moscow, those bundles tightened the model. Keys plus cadence hardened guesses into forecasts. A conv didn't need to be read if its heart rate could be timed. At home, John rewired fatherhood into apprenticeship. Michael wanted approval, John offered craft. Join the Navy, he said. Learn document flow. Keep your mouth shut and your hands steady. He taught him to flatten pages under a lamp without scarring staples, to shoot clean frames fast, to log what he touched so nothing looked disturbed. The first roll of practice, film. Admin pages that looked boring earned praise. It also earned cash. Grooming arrived as competence. Compartmentation kept consciences quiet. John gave each man a tailored mission. Arthur lifted industrial crumbs, Michael ferried shipboard minutiae, Whitworth fed the furnace. He told each one a story that made the theft feel small and contained. None knew the whole. Only John integrated, and he liked it that way. Power loves a hub. Arthur would later die in prison, his part in the small pieces ending with a sentence that never let him go. Tradecraft lived in suburbia. Walker standardized dead drops, Plastic-wrapped bundles, rubber-banded, slipped under culverts or behind guard rails. Signal sights looked like errands. A windshield sunshade positioned horizontal meant go, vertical meant abort. A strip of tape, a chalk mark, a soda can left upright on the wrong side of a bench. The choreography felt like a secret club with rules. It was, and the dues were paid in years. Money smoothed nerves and ceded control. John parceled payments unevenly, enough to soothe, not enough to nourish independence. Whitworth bristled. He wanted regularity. He got excuses. In 1984, he wrote the FBI letters as RUS, part confession, part negotiation. The Bureau's response lagged. The ring kept breathing. John pulled Jerry back with guilt and threat. Shared crimes welled stronger than shared beliefs. Barbara, John's wife, saw the mismatch first. Cash that didn't fit pay stubs, night drives with no duty behind them, a tighter grip when she asked questions. He bull-rushed doubts with charm or cruelty. The house turned into a pressure chamber. She drank. He tightened control. Domestic chaos became counterintelligence risk. Later, her call would light the fuse. For now, the enterprise ran on fear and habit. In Moscow, nothing gathered dust. Crypto shops ingested Whitworth's keys and procedures. Analysts layered Arthur's industrial breadcrumbs to forecast tempo, and Michael's pages confirmed rhythms from shipside reality. A frequency plan here, a training syllabus there, a watchbill taped above a console. Each fragment enriched the model. When a routing indicator occurred, they knew which platform class was shifting posture. When a fallback net woke at an odd hour, they knew where to listen harder. You don't need content when cadence cooperates. Meanwhile, John rehearsed operational hygiene like a catechism. Drive routes rotated. Drop windows floated. Abort criteria stayed sacred. He drilled Michael on nerves, how to scan without staring, how to look busy while doing nothing. He trained Arthur to hide theft inside routine. Copy rooms late, procurement files borrowed and returned clean. Whitworth needed no coaching on craft, only on restraint. His packages were immaculate. His patience was. Supervisors missed what hindsight spotlights. John's lifestyle crept. Restaurant tabs, new gadgets, a trip explained as a reunion. Competent warrant officers earned slack. Slack hides rot. Inside comms spaces, nobody wanted to believe the man who never lost a message could be the one selling the index. Familiarity is a lock you forget to test. Morally, John ran a con inside a con. He told Arthur the Soviets would use the material for balance, not blood. He told Michael he was building his son's future, a marketable skill, an inside track. He told Whitworth he was a consultant paid at last. He fractured guilt into pieces small enough to swallow and fed them back on bad days. When doubts surfaced, money answered. When money faltered, manipulation did. By the early 198s, the ring functioned like a small business. Inventory, delivery, customer satisfaction, and human resources in one man's calendar. Dead drops mapped to weekends. Signals synced to commutes. Family dinners doubled as briefings. And somewhere in an office in Moscow, a chart, spikes, lulls, narrow windows, told a fleet where to point microphones and when to surge planes. The crack didn't come from a safe or a cipher. It came from a kitchen phone. But before that call, before stakeouts and arrests, the family enterprise gave the KGB what it needed most, the ability to read silence like speech and routine like a plan. In the deep, where being found once is often being found forever, that edge is lethal. How the Soviets used the keys. They didn't treat Walker's Hall like trophies. They treated it like a workflow. Inside the KGB's 16th Directorate and the Soviet Navy's staffs, his material split across two tracks that fed each other every day. First, cryptologic access, Whitworth's key lists, procedures, changeover cycles. Second, operational interpretation, how those keys, timing windows, and routing indicators mapped onto real steel at sea. Start with the crypto. Keys and method pages took the guesswork out of recovery. Analysts no longer burned hours on speculative cribbing. They lined up changeovers, validated decrypts, and corrected errors with confidence. But the real gain wasn't reading more plaintext. It was seeing the pulse of US circuits. When a net woke, how long it stayed up, the cadence of corrections after drills, the odd lull that meant someone went to a fallback. That pulse became a heartbeat map. Then they married that pulse to oceans. Northern Fleet planners overlaid cadence on choke points, the GIUK gap, Barents approaches, Pacific Straits. If NetX shifted at hour Y across 3 patrols, you staged a bare-F orbit at Y-1 next time. If a narrowband test usually sat at a certain hour, you parked a Victor within listening range when that hour rolled around. Not latitude-longitude precise, but precise enough to allocate scarce sensors to the right windows. Arthur Walker's dull crumbs added muscle to the model. Manufacturing timetables, training syllabi, logistics notes, each piece gave context. A new frequency plan appearing alongside a shipyard milestone hinted at which platforms would re-enter service. A training cycle aligned with routing indicators suggested a surge in readiness. Michael's shipboard admin pages, watch bills, console warnings, fallback procedures, confirmed behavior from the deck plate. A watch rotation change here, a maintenance caution there. Each fragment nudged probabilities in ways a clean decrypt never could. They also learned to read absence like a paragraph. US doctrine prized brevity and silence. The KGB made silence talk. If a net didn't wake when it usually did, that negative space carried meaning. If an acknowledgement arrived 9 minutes late when it usually landed at 5, that drift mattered. Keys made those judgments safe. You weren't guessing, you were measuring. Meanwhile, signals intelligence fed training. Case studies circulated inside Soviet naval schools. Cadence surges before certain exercises, a recurring routing string that reliably preceded a platform shift, a fallback net that woke only for real problems. Officers learned to treat timing as targetable. They weren't handed secrets, they were handed rules. It made mediocre crews better and sharp crews dangerous. On the line, the gains showed up as attention that arrived on cue. A US submarine adjusted power for a routine narrowband test. Soon after, a distant turbine whine settled a beam longer than chance. A destroyer practicing passive tactics near a barrier found a Soviet shadow arriving earlier than comfort. Patrol aircraft orbited not at random, but on a beat learned from our own clocks. No revelation, just statistical pressure, carefully applied. Defensively, the Soviets used the model to shield their SSBN bastions. If US circuits hinted at a hunting window, they tightened layers, pulled routes closer to shore, stacked ASW coverage smarter. Keys didn't only hunt, they hid. Importantly, this wasn't magic. The model degraded without updates, and humans still made mistakes. But Walker's pipeline refreshed it. Whitworth's packages kept method pages current. Arthur's notes adjusted timelines. Michael's pages verified that shipside procedures hadn't drifted back to old habits. When US crypto overhauls shortened key lifetimes and tightened distribution, Moscow widened error bars, then trimmed them again as new deliveries arrive. You don't throw away a working map when it jitters. You damp it and keep steering. Did this produce kill shots? Officials split, devastating to serious, not disastrous. What's clear is how the fleet behaved. At sea, crews trained randomization like a weapon, smeared message windows, unscheduled fallback drills, micro-power changes off habit. Ashore, crypto lifetimes shrank, two-person integrity hardened, distribution fractured by design. Uncertainty, first a patch, became doctrine. The KGB noticed turbulence and adapted. They kept leverage where bureaucracy lagged and where human comfort crept back. A late changeover here, a watch routine drifting to an easy hour there. Each slip fed the model. Even as our culture shifted, islands of predictability remained, and they worked them. Consider a quiet case. A fast attack boat redirected its patrol box for intel reasons after a shore message arrived outside its normal window, a deliberate test of unpredictability. Hours later, Soviet presence bled into the new box, not a hard intercept, but attention arriving close enough to matter. The wardroom logged the lesson. Timing still buys teeth, even when content stays locked. Inside their labs, the winds turned into discipline. Analysts codified cadence rules into checklists. Trainers taught young officers why a 5-minute drift signals more than 100 decrypted lines. Planners learned to spend scarce assets on likely hours rather than broad days. It's not glamorous. It is lethal over time. By 1985, the ring collapsed. Models decay when sources die, but the Soviets had banked years of correlation. Those curves didn't vanish with an arrest, they faded. Until then, they guided choices: where to listen, when to surge, how to shield. In the deep, that's often enough. The Ring's operational tradecraft, and its blind spots. They hid in chores. Saturday errands doubled as reconnaissance, family drives as route checks. John Walker favored sites nobody stared at twice: highway pull-offs, service alleys behind shopping centers, culverts near commuter lots. He rehearsed approaches until nerves looked like boredom.